Hello YouTubers, this is Gold Standard C0924 coming at you with another video. So this is going to be the first audio podcast where I'm using this new headset microphone. So I tested it out and turns out it's working pretty well, so I'm pretty content with it overall. Um, so I basically explained that in my Christmas vlog, the day I got it for as one of my gifts for Christmas. So I don't really need to reiterate as much. But I'm just glad to have a new microphone, and don't hopefully don't have to have any problems in the long run. So this headset microphone will be what I'm going to be using from here on out. The next time I do audio podcasts such as this that I'll be doing for today. So yeah, it's just a slight new modification that I made. Just to kind of clear that up. So that aside, yeah. So in this video, it's going to be another TV series review that I've been kind of wanting to do for quite some time, and I mentioned also in my vlog that this would be a particular teen sitcom that came out during the late 1990s, and and unlike a lot of shows that I grew up with that I appreciate in the 90s, this show, on the other hand, I never really got to watch, basically because I never really heard about the show until many years later. So, basically, this particular teen sitcom aired in Canada on YTV, and as well in the US, as a matter of fact, they did air it here in the syndication. And yeah, the show that I'll be reviewing for it today is the 1990s teen sitcom called Student Bodies. So, how I discovered this show, um, I was just looking up at some of the actors that were on Are You Afraid of the Dark? Some of the cast members that were portraying one of the characters from the Midnight Society. And Are You Afraid of the Dark is without a doubt one of my favorite horror anthology series, as well as one of my favorite TV shows in general. And so I mean, I liked Nickelodeon back in the day, but Are You Afraid of the Dark was one of those Nickelodeon shows from that particular time period, which I really enjoyed watching. And after the show, and then just basically looking up at some of the actors to see what they've been up to, and out of all those characters that were on the show, I eventually checked up the actor that played Gary, who was obviously the leader of the Midnight Society, and he was portrayed by the actor by the name of Ross Hull. And basically, he's a kind of nowadays he's a retired actor, and he's currently a weatherman for a particular local news program up north. So yeah, so I was checking out some of his interviews, and I was really intrigued by them, and basically talking about his experiences on the show and how much of an impact that the show had on the target audience that was watching the show at the time. Um, Yeah, so then, also mostly Are You Afraid of the Dark stuff, but he also talked about other stuff, especially another TV show that he was on that was somewhat successful, if not equally successful as Are You Afraid of the Dark. Um, yeah, so this particular TV show, Student Bodies, was a show that kind of got me scratching my head as to like, this show sounds like pretty interesting. So I basically looked up some information to see what the show was all about, and and I just thought, might not give it a try. So yeah, I basically watched the entire series. So I was actually pretty intrigued enough already. Um, so and basically try to rewatch it again so I could get a better understanding of the direction of the show and the plot, and some of the characters, and some of the struggles that they go through in school, that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, so I'm gonna try and be as accurate as I possibly can, because normally, when I do these TV like reviews, I have a tendency of making mistakes, and then again all make mistakes, but I'm just gonna try my best to be as accurate and detailed as I possibly can. But yeah, so this is basically gonna be a review on this show, and yeah, so student bodies came out, at a time when, a lot of teen shows were pretty much saturating all over the place. Um, it kind of goes far back to like maybe around the tail end of the 80s, when, you had shows like, the Wonder Years. You also had, Saved by the Bell, obviously, which was the show that Student Bodies was inspired by. Um, Beverly Hills 90210 that came out in 1990. The original Degrassi, which is a very popular Canadian teen show up north. Um, yeah, so those particular shows kind of laid the foundation for a lot of programs that center around these mixture group of kids dealing with the struggle growing up in an adolescent life. So yeah, so you had like a lot of shows like that in the 90s. But um, out of all those shows, Student Bodies was one of the many examples of those teen shows that kind of defined what was culturally relevant. Um, and especially not just the basic cable channel with Nick and Disney, but also broadcast TV. And around the early mid '90s, I remember NBC also had a block called TNBC, which was basically like a teen-oriented block that was mostly devoted to a lot of sitcoms that Peter Engel and his company produced. Especially shows like California Dreams, Hang Time, City Guys, um, Saved by the Bell. His most successful work that everyone remembers. Um, yeah, so TNBC actually played a part in that. You also had other off-network syndicated shows like Sweet Valley High and Breaker High, which was like one of Ryan Gosling's earlier acting roles. So, and I think coincidentally enough, that show also aired around the same network as YTV in Canada, and coincidentally, the same year that it came out was 1997. So, yeah, so those two shows came out around the exact same time. Um, yeah, so just the whole landscape of where television was at the time that this show came out was very significant and very historic. Um, Buffy the Vampire Slayer also a movie turned into a one of the most successful TV shows. Um, and it was just tremendous at the time. Um, Maybe not tremendous in like to describe something, but like very historic, like I was gonna mention. So yeah, so student bodies, getting to the actual show. The premise starts off when you had the lead character Cody Miller, the aspiring artist. You primarily sketches his cartoons, and he attends this school called Thomas Edison, where he attends along with his friends Chris Shepard and Mags Abernathy. They've been friends even before this show came out or before the show began, but they've known each other for a while. And you also have the new girl in town named Emily Roberts who gets transferred over to Thomas Edison. Just basically the main school setting of the entire show. So yeah, so basically, she eventually becomes fast friends with the three characters, and they both get this classroom project assignment that was signed by the teacher. And and eventually, it turns out that little classroom project would turn out to be something that they would be doing on a daily basis. And so, this was kind of really where the seeds are set for the formation of the school newspaper group. And as a matter of fact, before the student bodies was formed, there was actually another newspaper group entitled the Student Voice, which was read by the antagonists of Victor Kane and Flash. And one of Cody's friends, especially Chris, who used to work for the Student Voice, they had this sort of falling out, and because of the creative differences, Chris decides to kind of break away from the two and basically to kind of counteract the whole thing, Chris ends up publishing Cody's drawings. And originally, without his Cody's consent, because Cody was pretty hesitant on exposing his cartoons out to the school, and Chris ends up breaking that, and eventually they sort of get in trouble when the vice principal of the show, and as well as the school, you have Principal Morton, excuse me. So yeah, eventually she finds out, and she finds this drawing of hers, and gets pretty. She kind of flips out at first, and they kind of work. The main characters and the principal, the vice principal of the school, eventually have this little conversation in their office, and eventually she tries to be a lot more open. She kind of overreacted. She kind of starts making amends with the main characters of the show, and eventually using the school's budget. Eventually, the formation of student bodies is created, and that, along with their rival student voice, they end up sharing the same room, but they're kind of split half and half. But yeah, so they were pretty much rivals early on in the series, but by the end of the series, or at least like around the second season, they basically there's basically student body, so the whole rivalry doesn't last long because student voice ends up dissolving afterwards. So like Victor and Flash would go on to be part of student bodies, part of their former rival group. So it's kind of like just you can't beat them, join them, sort of thing. But yeah, so that's basically the original premise of the show. So it started off with the four students, but eventually Grace gets brought in, and they kind of worked on this little time capsule to kind of reminisce on how they formed and basically how it became where they are today. So basically, along the way, you also have Cody, who starts having this sort of romantic crush on Emily, and eventually they've kind of teased it early on in the series, and eventually, Emily also has feelings for Cody as well. And eventually, it wasn't until the Christmas concert where they start when they have their first kiss under the mistletoe, and basically they were trying to do like this little concert to kind of raise money, and originally like the principal decided to like cut the budget out for the because they were trying to do like a Christmas play, but eventually she had to cut the budget, and they were unable to hold the event unless the whole gang tries to figure something out, and that was doing the concert, some and basically do it someplace else, at the station, which was basically the main hangout of the TV show, basically. Um, yeah, so Cody and Emily, like I said, they have their first kiss. So basically, about the second half of the series, they're dating, and they're in they're kind of like the power couple of the show, and that doesn't really last for very long as we get to the last few episodes of the first season, and Cody starts meeting up this new girl named Tanya, who eventually is introduced herself to Cody when Cody and Emily, that is, when Flash was trying to do like a school assignment, and Cody and Emily were also like in this little play that they were going to be in. Um, yeah, so that was like the same episode where Emily became like this little slut, or starting to dress all slutty and um, out of character. Um, and eventually by the final episode of the first season. Um, so eventually, Emily gets grounded, and Cody, they were trying to celebrate on like their anniversary since they started dating, and Cody tells Emily that he loves her, but Emily didn't really respond to anything. And it wasn't, and then basically the series, not the series, the season finale, when Cody goes to this little art institute and finds out that Tanya attends the same class as him, and starts drawing like these new pictures of her because that was basically his assignment. So eventually Emily finds out. She starts becoming infuriated, and by the end of the episode, Cody tries to go for the honesty route, but things didn't work out the way that he thought it would be planned. So yeah, so pretty much yeah, Cody and Emily, they kind of have their frictions, and then basically Cody goes to see Tanya, and eventually have a one night stand basically. So that's really how the first season ends. Even though you don't actually see them having a one night stand, because this was actually geared towards younger children, so they couldn't really go that far. But so that's really the end of the first season, basically. um, yeah. So basically, when that show, it was just very, I don't know, it was something that you wouldn't really see with a lot of teen shows, especially aiming it towards especially half-hour shows that are on the like this was like on the kids network. So it was like when I watched it, I was like, how did this get past the censors? I mean, sure, there were some cases where they don't really have to, where they make like subtle references to like hidden innuendos and stuff. Um, I was thinking about that scene where oh man, I think I lost my train of thought. I think it was like that. I remember like this little cartoon sketch in one episode. I believe it was like around the second season where they actually show Babe Watch or something like that, where they like expose the female's breast, some of the woman's breasts during Cody's cartoon sketches. I was like, I was like, whoa, like how did this get past that? I'm not sure what the standards and practice are in Canada, but I don't know if it aired in the U.S. on the kid station here. I just can't see them airing those episodes. And that episode, Tanya, I believe that was the name of the season finale of the first season. And then actually drawing nude photos of her. I was like, that was something you wouldn't even see in like, you know, Saved by the Bell, obviously, because I believe Saved by the Bell aired on Saturday mornings. So, and I believe Student Bodies aired on prime time. So there was no way they could have, Saved by the Bell wouldn't have done that because, well, it would have been out of character of the show to do that, um, but it would have been kind of unheard of. But yeah, that kind of sort of caught me off guard, but not in like a very infuriating way or anything. Um, yeah, so that was really my thoughts on some of the little innuendos that was on within the show, or at least one notable example I could think of. Um, and then you also have the time capsule episode, which I was gonna discuss, but I kind of got carried away. Um, yeah, so the time capsule episode was kind of like basically the unofficial pilot. Um, now I was looking up at some of the episode lists to see which episodes came in order, and it turns out that that YTV aired Disco Cody as the first episode, and Time Capsule aired like a little later. But because because those episodes were kind of self-contained, um, with the Time Capsule episode, they kind of laid the groundwork and the direction that the show was going at the time. So I was still very curious as to just if there was like maybe like an unaired pilot episode, because um I'm not really sure if there was ever like an unaired pilot episode where they actually show the entire um because they basically with the time capsule episode they use some of the flashback scenes as kind of like highlights to uh summarize some of the key important events that happened since in the lead up to the formation of student bodies. And if you notice like in the flashback, um, some of the characters look a lot different compared to like in the actual show. Like Chris's hair, like in the early episodes, they weren't like as spiked up like in most of the series, and I think Emily's hair was a little shorter um compared to like in the actual episode. But in the flashback scene, it was like I was kind of wondering just how long has it been since they actually shot that episode, and maybe there might have been some unaired pilot episode that just never aired on television, you know. Um, but yeah, I'm just very curious about that. But it was still a pretty solid start. But I was kind of a little, um, just out of curiosity, just wondering if there was an episode that maybe never made it on the air, and maybe there could be like some kind of, um, if it might be somewhere in the vault, basically. Um, so yeah, so that's basically all I have to say about the time capsule. So yeah, so basically they were the graduating class of 2000. So yeah, so this basically Student Bias was definitely a show, I think, for its own time, because I mean if you watch it now, it's like okay, it was like wow, look at this fashion, it's so retro, it's so 90s, and even a lot of the pop culture references that they mentioned at the time were basically shows that were pretty relevant. What was in the now, and there would be some times where they mentioned that like they mentioned about like Miss Morin said that she wanted to watch Party of Five or something. Like she mentioned something about Party of Five in the episode The Trial, when when Cody dreams about this, gets taken to this little courtroom session, and it was basically in this subconscious mind. And after he and Emily have their falling out, and basically, Cody would end up being pleaded guilty in that same episode, and eventually breaks up with Emily officially by the end of the season premiere. So yeah, so I remember like Miss Warren wanted to like mention something about Party of Five and how she doesn't want to miss that an episode of it. Um, what else did I mention? I think they did like a parody on like Baywatch, and then there was like the last few episodes of season three about like Felicity, where there like it was called Felicity. What was it? Felicity. Some I can't remember how you pronounce it, but it was basically a parody of Felicity, which was the show with Kerry Russell and Amy Jo Johnson. Yeah, who was on that show at the time on the WB. So yeah, they did like a little cartoon sketch where they're kind of parodying Felicity. Um, but basically, a lot of like TV shows that were around that no one really talks about anymore. Um, I think they also had like X Files. They also parody X Files. Um, yeah, so yeah, there were some jokes that were kind of a little dated, especially in terms of some of the pop culture references that they made during that time. But I think the most important thing about the show was just the chemistry and some of the punchlines that the show had. Um, but especially more of the like the chemistry with the whole main cast of the show, because I thought they actually were pretty good. I think out of all those characters, I really like the chemistry between Victor and Flash. I thought they were the best parts of that show, and especially Victor just being like, he was kind of like a Caucasian Carlton Banks, and he could be pretty intelligent, but also can be pretty dorky at times, and and basically, their chemistry, his chemistry with Flash, was very spot on. They were only like the only two that were never really an official couple. Like unlike some of the other main characters that hook up with one another, like Cody and Emily, and then Emily Romeo, and Mags and Chris as well. Um, Grace and Cody, as soon as Cody breaks up with Emily. So yeah, so they were um, the only two that that even though they were main characters, they never really officially hooked up. Um, but I think their friendship, their whole the whole dynamic between the two was very impactful, and I thought that they provide some really good humor and entertainment, however you want to kind of describe it. But I just thought they were the best part of the show overall. Um, let's see. And then, yeah, you also had in the first season, there weren't really too many cast changes, but there was only like two people that left the show, but everything else, they pretty much kept the same cast for the most part. But out of one of those two characters, the first one I want to bring up was the character of that plays Morgan, and she was kind of like this blonde, stuck-up, rich girl, and that Chris has pretty much a crush on, and she was portrayed by the actress by the name of Erin Sims, and she was only around for that particular first season, just as not Cody, Chris's love interest, and eventually, Chris eventually finds out just how selfish and stuck up that Morgan is, and how manipulative that she was. Chris eventually finds out that Morgan is just not who Chris thought she was, and eventually, she gets over her. Um, and basically after that, she pretty much served her purpose. I mean, she did have a little cameo in Bad Girl Emily, when Emily was kind of just being like this sluttyish girl and just basically kind of bullying her. I think, yeah, she looked like that was like that one scene. And then she appeared in the episode The Trial, which was like the season 2 opener. And after that, she was never really seen or mentioned from again. So one of those few instances. It's one of those things where I hate about TV shows sometimes, especially when the character disappears and is never mentioned or seen or explained why this particular character left. Sort of reminds me of like Family Matters, when they, like, in the early seasons, where they had like Judy, who was like the I believe she was like the youngest out of the whole Winslow family, and then later on Judy disappears, and there was like the saying goes that she went upstairs and never came out, um, out of her room or something. Um, yeah, it kind of reminded me of that incident, and that's one of the things that kind of peeves me when it comes to TV shows. But thankfully enough, I mean, this was only happened with her character. I mean, not anyone else's. But yeah, so she was portrayed by Erin Sims, like I said, and and I think not long after she left this show, she would get an audition for the role of Maya in Power Rangers Lost Galaxy. And there's actually pictures of her actually shooting the episode Quasar Quest. And I'm not sure if there are any Power Ranger fans watching this video right now that also enjoyed student bodies growing up. But yeah, so Erin Sims actually appeared in the earlier tapings. I mean, she wasn't there in the final product, but eventually she dropped out for unknown reasons, and then they replaced her with Serena Vincent. And yeah, she would go on to become the actual Maya, and that jungle girl who was kind of like Sheena, but she doesn't transform into animals. But yeah, she was kind of like the jungle girl. Um, yeah, so yeah, basically after that, I don't think she really did much. I mean, there was like an interview on Ranger Board where she basically there was like a couple of years ago where she talked about what she had been doing, and especially after she left student bodies, and she had like a music career and something. Then she kind of quit acting, and then she went back into acting again. I'm probably gonna leave an article down in the description box if you guys are interested, but it's pretty self-explanatory, so I don't want to kind of go into too much detail with that, since I'm just basically also have other things to talk about student bodies. So yeah, so that's basically my thoughts on Erin Sims. But yeah, I mean, she was a pretty attractive lady. I think all the female characters and all the actresses on the show were equally as attractive. But to be fair, um, yeah. So eventually, her character kind of leaves after the first season. Um, and then you also had Grace, who was around in the first two seasons. And eventually she kind of starts off as this kind of like this clumsy teenager that does something wrong, and like it's not like in the Steve Urkel sense of clumsiness, but it was definitely a clumsiness. Um, but eventually, like after the first season, they kind of phased that whole character trait out of that, and basically by the second season, she ends up becoming the love interest to Cody. After he broke up with the well, after he and Emily end up parting ways. So yeah, so eventually they hook up, but yeah, you don't really see them develop as much because most of the time, um, she's kind of off screen, or she doesn't really get a lot of screen time even um, once you get to like a little after they hook up, because there were times where they kind of gave excuses to why Grace couldn't show up, especially in that New Year's episode where Grace had to visit a relative out of town, and so yeah, she didn't even appear at all in that episode. Um, and there were a couple episodes where, yeah, she appeared in Double Date. When they brought in Cody's dad, who eventually by this point Cody moved in with his father, and yeah, eventually his father ends up dating with this woman that was his teacher. Um, and yeah, in the episode after that, she ends up getting a little scholarship, and as a result, she had to move out of the country to go to Europe, or yeah, Europe, and yeah, and then basically after that, they end up breaking up when Grace sends that "Dear John" email, um, and just basically breaking him up that way. Yeah, so she left the show. I don't really know exactly why, as well, but they did at least give her a send off there. So I can't really complain too much on that. Um, yeah, so yeah, she left the show. So basically, those two characters were like the only ones that kind of well, not disappeared, but that end up leaving the show by the end of the series. But everything else was pretty much mostly the same format as it been since the beginning of the show. Um, and then I think around the third season they bring in well, once again Cody gets another love interest, and believe it or not, actually Catherine Winnick was on this show. Yeah, she was on this show, so it was pretty interesting to see what she was, what she was doing during that time, and just one of her earlier acting gigs. So yeah, so they had her character hook up with Cody, and yeah, eventually Cody starts to find out, just how kind of similar to a similar situation that Chris and like Chris's problem with Morgan, and how manipulative that she was, but it's somewhere along those lines. But getting to Cody and Holly, was like Holly was gonna use Cody, and then they were gonna have like this one night stand, and Cody insist on backing off, but turns out that Holly was gonna dump Cody anyways. Um, but yeah, so eventually they have a lot of friction as well because um, yeah, so damn, I'm losing my train of thought. So yeah, so eventually Holly meets up with Cody and his pals when they had like this sort of T-shirt contest, or not necessarily a T-shirt contest, but just more of a like Chris was gonna sell like all these T-shirts about how with the whole imprint saying censorship sucks, and it was supposed to, and their intention was for student bodies to kind of give that little positive message. And the vice principal, Miss Morton, finds out, but Cody tries to take a stand, and then Holly ends up helping Cody out, and then eventually do, and then eventually they do hook up, like I said. So Yeah, so eventually, while everything seems to be fine at first, eventually Cody starts realizing, Holly's ego was starting to become exposed, and Cody was gonna prepare to break up with Holly, but eventually she does. But yeah, so eventually he hops in from relationship to relationship, so he's kind of been in a revolving door, and then eventually goes as far as the hooking up um, with Holly's friend Kim, who was portrayed by Jennifer Finnegan, another Canadian actress that would also go on to have a very successful career. Um, yeah, so they pretty much become a couple, despite the fact that Holly ends up finding out that they were already had feelings for each other. So so eventually they sort of despite their little dysfunctional relationship or friendship, um, yeah, eventually they make amends, and they were kind of using Holly to kind of be like this little plot device to serve as the transition from Grace's departure to part of the main cast, or at least replacing Grace as uh, one of the eight main characters of the show. So yeah, so that was basically the third season, and yeah, it didn't really have an ending. But yeah, so basically, they were kind of the show ended when they were still in school. They were kind of in their junior year. So so that was kind of disappointing that it ended the way it did. But Cody and Kim, they were still together, and I believe that last episode where Cody and Emily try to hook up. Well, Kim had this sort of concern that Cody and Emily still have feelings for each other, and they do in fact go out on a date, but it turns out that there wasn't really any spark, as it seems, going into that episode, and and eventually, they pretty much start denying any sort of romantic feelings for each other, and that was basically that was the last episode of that show. There was really no end game or no sense of a cliffhanger, you know, but yeah, overall, Student Bodies, just a pretty enjoyable show. But I mean, I think if I had to choose between this show and Saved by the Bell, oh, that's gonna be. I think Student Bodies kind of holds up a little more compared to Saved by the Bell, because I mean, Saved by the Bell, I actually grew up watching, and when I look back, it's just kind of very mindless and very. It was kind of very hokey. I mean, it's not. They kind of beat you the head with a lot of them, kind of like one of those after school specials that they had, and like every episode had to have a moral, and that sort of thing. It was very formulaic, and Mr. Belling always having to come out there and just ask what's going, hey, 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 what's going on here, you know, and but Student Bodies was kind of more like very story driven, and it's normally pretty consistent in terms of the storytelling and the continuity sort of things. Um, but yeah, so I think Student Bodies is definitely a show I think I could appreciate a little more, maybe because I'm a kind of like a young adult now. So it's kind of interesting just to see how ahead of the time how the show was ahead of its time, basically. Um, yeah, so there were kind of few special episodes. Um, I think there's only like three of them I could think of, but it was definitely uh, yeah, the episode "Gay Friend" where Emily's friend comes over. They both where she spends the night with Emily, and eventually Emily's friend eventually tells Flash that about her homosexuality, and eventually Flash ends up spreading it to her friends, and eventually Emily finds out, and and just has a hard time understanding the difficulty of just the idea structure of what it's like to be gay, basically. Hence the name of the keyword episode. But yeah, so yeah, that was actually a pretty shocking episode. Well, not in like in a bad sense, but it was more like just the fact that not a lot of teen shows, especially sitcoms, aiming towards like a younger audience, would actually go out their way to actually talk about this sort of stuff. And then it was actually pretty interesting. And nowadays, it's a lot of people are coming out and being more accepted with the with the whole sexuality of things, and definitely this is something that not a lot of teen shows talked about, unless you were like Degrassi. But I don't know many other shows besides those two that I could think of, especially during the during that particular time period where it was the times were kind of different compared to now, where it's like I said, it's kind of accepted now for some countries or some states here, depending on where you live, um, that's a lot more accepted to be have two mates of the same gender uh, hooking up. Um, yeah, so that was that episode. There was also an episode where Mags starts contemplating on whether or not to get breast implants, and she was going to be in this sort of school play where she said that she was going to be a stripper. Um, and so everyone's all of her friends are starting to express their concern, but eventually Mags just kind of learns the just eventually kind of reconsiders just whether or not she's confident enough to undergo surgery, basically. Um, what other ones? And then the episode Victor gets drunk, where basically they throw in this all-out party with no chaperones or anything like that. Just basically an unsanctioned kind of like a non-sanctioned party, basically. And Victor drinks one too many beers, and eventually goes out his way to act all insane, and basically the psychological effects of when you're consuming too much alcohol. And eventually he ends up hurting Flash, verbally, not physically, but verbally. Um, yeah, so that was actually the only three after school special episodes I could think of, but there weren't really too many of those, which I think kind of makes it a more unique, um, not to beat the viewers in the head with every episode being like a lesson of the day, unless it was like really necessary. So yeah, so that's basically my thoughts on student bodies. But overall, just leave down what you think about the TV show down in the description box, or the comment section, excuse me. Um, so till next time, this is the Gold Standards User 924 signing out.